President Biden is reaching out to his Democratic colleagues on Capitol Hill this week with back-to-back appearances, all with a likely re-election bid on the horizon. After a meeting between the president and senators today, Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said they are, quote, filled with optimism about 2024. And last night, the president gave a speech at the House Democratic retreat, pushing lawmakers to tout the party's legislative accomplishments that they say they've had over the last 2 years. So for more on this, let's bring in Nikole Killion and Ed O'Keefe. Nikole is CBS News congressional correspondent. She is in Baltimore, Maryland with Democrats, and Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent joining us from the North Lawn. Great to see you both. Nikole, I want to start with you because you were on Capitol Hill earlier today during this meeting, and you actually got that question into Biden that we heard in that clip. What did he have to say about what he discussed with Democrats today?
Well, you know, he didn't really go into a lot of detail about his discussions with Democrats. Of course, the question we pressed him on was the one that everybody wants to know, which is when he intends to announce his reelection, if he has made a decision about whether he will run for reelection. And while certainly aides around him and many congressional Democrats expect that he will make that decision, as you heard him say, you know, he will announce it basically when he announces it. So obviously not tipping his hand there, although his wife did make clear when she was traveling abroad recently that she is all for it should he decide to run again. But that being said, you know, a lot of what he discussed with Senate Democrats was similar to what he discussed with House Democrats, Democratic priorities and their agenda, you know, touting some of the accomplishments they have made, whether that is the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the infrastructure law, but also not only trying to sell that message as they head into 2024, but also the legislative agenda ahead. You know, obviously the debt limit is still unresolved, so that did come up in these meetings. The president did make clear that he may be supportive of a new rail safety bill that was just introduced yesterday by a bipartisan group of senators that would prevent future toxic train derailments like what we saw in East Palestine, Ohio. And he also told senators that he will not veto an upcoming measure that the Senate will vote on perhaps as soon as next week that deals with D.C.'s criminal code. This is something that has already passed the House and will be up for a vote soon in the Senate. So again, the president indicating he won't veto that measure.
And Ed, I mean, Nikole is mentioning that, you know, Democrats want to tout successes, but they're also heading into these next 2 years with divided government and Republicans in control of the House. So how does Biden, you know, plan to sort of keep that up? I mean, there's still a lot that they seem to have to implement from, you know, previous legislation.
And that's the focus, is focus on the implementation, focus on selling what we did get accomplished with united, complete Democratic government, and you know, pick and choose some potentially important and more modest pieces of legislation that allow us to look like we're doing something to help people or that help us politically at home. I think this D.C. home rule issue, which is a complicated thing to understand if you don't live here in what we call the DMV, the District, Maryland, Virginia area, is a good example of that. Basically, the president today telling these senators, I'm told unprompted, that he would not veto a Republican piece of legislation that reverses a D.C. City Council law changing some elements of the criminal code and, in essence, reducing sentences for things like carjackings and some other violent crimes. The mayor didn't like that idea. Remember, D.C. isn't a state, and Congress can review D.C. passed legislation. The president, realizing what's going to happen here, opted to announce unprompted that he would support that law reversing the changes made, in order, essentially, to avoid the accusation that Democrats, and especially those Senate candidates in red or purple states in 2024, are soft on crime. Joe Manchin, John Tester, Bob Casey, Angus King, all of them in tough re-election races next year, should they choose to run. We're waiting to hear about Manchin and King. Signaled that they were likely to join Republicans in supporting that. And the president, realizing he could give them political air cover today, seems to have opted for supporting that move at the expense of D.C. statehood, which Age here reminded us today he's been supportive of for decades. So that's the kind of 2024 play that's going on here, is coming up with ways to avoid some of the attacks that might come their way from Republicans, neuter them as much as possible, and then find ways to work with Republicans where it makes sense.
Yeah, and Ed, you actually, as you mentioned, asked about that during the briefing. I do want to play a little bit of that sound.
Is the president playing 2024 politics with this local Washington, D.C. issue at the expense of his longstanding, decades-long support of D.C. State?
What I'll say here is not going to get into 2024 analysis or political punditry from here. We are covered, I am covered, we are covered by the Hatch Act, as you know, and so I'm certainly not going to get into analysis from here.
Yeah. So, Ed, I mean, this is the difficulty for the president, right? Kind of navigating this kind of landscape. And we often hear from the press secretary that she's not going to talk about politics from the podium.
But she had by laying out the president's views on this and making clear that he thinks it's important to be tough on these kinds of things and to not be reducing sentences for crimes that have seen an uptick, especially in this city, but in other big cities across the country. So she had already done that. But when asked explicitly about it, suggested, oh, no, there's no gambling going on in this establishment at all.
Right. Of course not.
If you follow the gist.
Absolutely. Nikole, I want to switch gears a little bit because we have some news today that the House Ethics Committee has opened an investigation into Congressman George Santos. This is pretty big news. What are the next steps for the Ethics Committee panel on this? I mean, we had all been waiting to see what they were going to do, and McCarthy was also waiting to see what they were going to do.
Yeah, well, significant but not surprising. You know, this was something where we knew there was certainly a good possibility that the Ethics Committee would open an investigation into George Santos. Part of why it may be happening now is simply because the Ethics Committee had to be put together and had to be organized. Of course, we're still kind of in the early stages of this Congress where a lot of committees are just kind of starting their initial steps. The Ethics Committee, no exception. And so, of course, today they announced that they are launching this investigation into Congressman George Santos and going to be looking into a number of things, you know, whether or not he engaged in unlawful activity with respect to his campaign, whether or not he failed to properly disclose required information on statements that were filed with the House, whether he violated federal conflict of interest laws, and whether or not he potentially engaged in sexual misconduct towards an individual who temporarily worked for his office. So there is a lot that this panel is going to dive into. Obviously unclear what the timetable is, how long it will take for the Ethics Committee to go through this investigation and go through all those various level areas of interest. But the congressman did respond in a tweet late this afternoon saying that he will comply with this investigation. But certainly this is one, as you know, Caitlin, many investigations that the congressman is embroiled in.
Yeah, and we'll see where those lead. This could take a long time, as you mentioned. Ed, I want to talk about East Palestine because you kind of have this connection with lawmakers on Capitol Hill asking for answers, Republicans urging the president to go there. It seemed like you tried to get some clarification about whether Biden is planning to visit the site of that train derailment. What's the White House saying? I mean, could that trip happen?
They didn't rule it out, but there are no immediate plans. And I think, Caitlin, this is a good example of what we were talking about earlier. Hit Republicans where it makes sense, neuter their arguments or their attacks when you can, but work with them when you can as well. And the president signaled today in his meeting with Senate Democrats he supports the now bipartisan legislation that's been put forward by Ohio's 2 senators and 6 total, 3 Republican, 3 Democrat, to try to address some of the concerns raised by the East Palestine derailment. That kind of modest but big headline-grabbing legislation is what the president's looking for. And it was a good example, essentially, of why he went up there today to say, you find examples like that, get them to my desk as fast as you can. I'm happy to work with you on it.
Yeah, interesting to see if that's kind of the roadmap going forward. Nikole Killion and Ed O'Keefe, talking to you a lot from Capitol Hill to the White House over the next couple of years. We appreciate your time. The